Hi, friends. We're back with another article I wrote on my Substack on April 12th, 2024 about Keith Giffen, rest in peace. Genius or ugly? This 90s comic still confuses everyone. A review of Keith Giffen's Trencher. Keith Giffen passed away October 9, 2023. Here are the last words he wrote on the internet. Let's open that up. This is a tweet. I told them I was sick. Anything not to go to New York Comic Con. Thanks. Keith Giffen, 1952 to 2023. So his last words to his fans, to his audience, was a joke. So bold and just committed to the bit to the end. This is how I choose to remember Keith Giffen, a sarcastic jester whose wit made it impossible for anyone to take themselves too seriously. Keith was both a writer and artist, most well known for his work at DC, where he co-piloted the Legion of Superheroes for many years. The Legion first appeared in the late 50s as a plot device to get Superboy embroiled in time travel. These heroes from the 31st century became popular on their own and eventually got a title. This is where Keith made his reputation as a solid artist and plotter. With his collaborators, Keith would go on to make some beloved Legion stories such as The Great Darkness Saga and 5 Years Later. We may discuss those in later editions of this newsletter, but for now I want to focus on Keith's most controversial post-Legion work, Trencher. Trencher is a book Keith wrote and drew for Image Comics at its apex. I wrote about Image Comics and its significance here. There's a link there if you go to the Substack newsletter. Link in the description. The brief of it is that comics creators had gotten rich and famous at Marvel Comics in the 90s, so they took their ball and went to their newly created home, Image Comics. That era peaked and crashed quickly, but there was a period of time where the doors blew open and Keith bounced in with a comics creation that still baffles fans 30 years later. Let's start by looking at some of the art of Trencher. Here's the cover to issue 1. Now I have this whole series, including the Christmas special, and I also have the Heckler series. I have quite a few Keith Giffen independent work. So, but this is definitely what pulled me in. If you think this cover is busy and confusing, look at the first few pages of this book. I remember sitting there with my wife, we were looking at that, just puzzling out what actually was going on. It turns out it's a explosion that comes down from space and delivers a character. It's incredible to look at. Okay. Throb. I find these pages brilliant, but I've read them many times now. Most people are either attracted to or put off by the art. Let's break it down a little. This art style uses jagged line work with little to no weight variation. Instead of cross-hatching, there are a series of small intersecting lines and shapes placed over the outlines, which are drawn over multiple times. Like how multi-tracking in a recording studio adds texture to the main track. So they do that in music. So and I have a bit of experience because I was in a band for a while. You'll have your vocal track or your guitar track, and then you'll play the same exact thing over top the original one, but because of the small variations in the way you play it, it adds texture to the original track and makes it sound larger and more interesting. The panel compositions mostly appear to have no single subject, as if they are a series of random photos someone took while falling down. To me, this is the comic book equivalent of found footage films like the Blair Witch Project. Also present is Giffen's fondness for visual gags, such as a sound effect placed in a word balloon, pointing to an object, and each page number drawn in by hand. So I think you might see an example of this. So the page number at the bottom here, and it's hand drawn, number 2, and each one's a bit different. If you look at, let's open it in a different tab. See, the traffic light, something hits the traffic like a can, and the sound effect, instead of just saying clud, the sound effect is surrounded by a jagged word balloon, which makes sense because the word balloon matches the line type of the artwork, right? It's there's a visual cohesion here, even if you may not like the style. It's thoughtful, it's well thought out, and you can see this page 1, right? And you look at page 2, and it's a different number, and so on. Each page has got a different style of number there. The colors are not Giffen's. They are credited to Digital Chameleon, a Canadian coloring studio and the pioneer of digital coloring, which is now the standard in the industry. In 1993, digital coloring was new, and readers were curious about the novelty. You can see in these pages what are now basic gradients in Photoshop's toolkit. This and other then new tools, such as sampling and access to a wider palette, were available, and they were gonna use them. Damn it. The result is a gloriously garish mess. In the day, they used to even advertise, new digital coloring to hype up a comic book, right? In these layouts, instead of images representative of story moments, we have an assortment of puzzle pieces representative of aspects of an event. These sorts of layouts ask a lot of the reader's engagement with the principle of closure, as discussed by Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, a book that is required reading in my opinion. So here he describes it, closure. We may go into like a Scott McCloud kind of deep dive into that book. It's an incredible book, especially the part on closure. It's basically, closure is what you do in your mind when two images are juxtaposed and you relate them. You make the connection between the two images. But here, Keith Giffen is doing it within the artwork. He's asking you to kind of put it together in your mind. In Trencher, Giffen asks a high level of active participation from the reader in order to close the scene from panel to panel. But further, the claustrophobic shot composition and lack of line weight variation lean heavily into the closure principle within each panel. It's like a Where's Waldo book, but instead of finding Waldo, you are finding the subject of the composition. Am I reading too much into it? Let me know in the comments. For me, the fun in reading this book is learning the language of the art style. I admit that though I was immediately attracted to the art, it took me a good half hour before feeling comfortable looking at it. It is not generously clear like standard comic art is, but it does become a smoother reading experience once you start getting a feel for the visual vocabulary Giffen built up for this book. On the story side, the protagonist does eventually show up. Let's take a look at him here. That's the protagonist, Trencher. If we look up closer, that's his face, coat, and he's wielding a gun. This end out. Title, Life Sucks, and then you come back. So Trencher is a guy who keeps getting revived again and again to do his job, which is like he's hunting bad guys, hunting people who skipped out on their reincarnation journey or whatever. They were supposed to be dead and they skipped it, you know. The story here is not the thing that's most memorable. It's obviously the artwork. Oops. The Trencher character is a sort of reincarnation robot who gets sent back to Earth to harvest souls who have been wrongly reincarnated. He hates his job and is good at it. The villains are equally ridiculous. Issue 1's protagonist is the Nasal Python, whose power is extensible nose hairs. Next issue's antagonist is Cher Noble, a Nazi-sympathizing, teetotaling cyborg grandmother. And eventually there is an Elvis-inspired villain. It's all very ribald, satirical, and surely revealing of Given's interest in Mad Magazine. In fact, the whole premise of the book seems to be Giffen's mockery of the Image style. Infinite pouches, scratchy lined work, indulgent splash pages, and violence as a selling feature. Case in point, look at this ad in the back of Trencher #1 for an upcoming Rob Liefeld book. This is Youngblood, Bloodshot, Deathmate. This blood's for you. Right, a lot of lines, a lot of, kind of, you could argue like super rendered, overly rendered. Right, and you compare that with the Trencher artwork, right? Right, you can kind of see a little bit of what he's doing. In my opinion, that seems to be he's kind of taking the piss. In the era, Image was the hot young guy's turf. In that era, Image was the hot young guy's turf. Giffen went in as a long-seasoned pro. I think he was putting one over on young guys like Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, and Stephen Platt by turning their shtick up to 11 and doing it better. The audience then didn't know what to make of it all. They probably weren't ready to poke fun at the indulgences of the comics market, which had immense hype behind it. Hype that, in hindsight, was clearly not backed up by much substance. But Giffen knew, and with Trencher he thumbed his nose at it all. I studied the Trencher style a bit, and learned a lot about seeing the human figure as chunks of flesh and bone instead of a light reflecting surface. Not many people know about Keith Giffen's Trencher, let alone discuss it, so I wanted to do my part in underlining this strange, gaudy book. Last week I saw issue #4 in the back issue bins, and I took it out to show the guys at the comic shop. We huddled around it, laughing at the bizarre images. How many books do you know can do that? There are 4 issues of Trencher and a holiday special called Xmas Bites. I have all of them. So I did a little poll, which got 8 votes. What do you think of Trencher? Wow, it's amazing, 75%. Wow, I am so confused, 25%. And there was some good discussion, 15 comments. Epic, love to see more people talking about Giffen. Huge inspiration for me growing up. Oh, okay, I'm following Daniel Holdridge. Geoduck reminds me of the Liefeld-inspired Doomforce Special Number 1. But the Trencher art is interesting on its own terms. It's far more than parody. I agree. I've got all 4 issues, Bone Rider. I liked the art, but I liked that the art was so different. It's not just the art, but the dialogue takes getting used to. Brilliant book, but I totally understand how it's not for everyone, for sure. Now do Ambush Bug. Ambush Bug, I just don't like the character. Typically, I actually don't like the parody books, but I tolerate Giffen's, parody, satire, sarcastic humor, just because I love his art style. Captain Kickistand. I enjoyed Trencher. It was the visual equivalent of the super ultra edge to the max type of action adventure writing you were going to see in Trencher and Lobo. Yeah, definitely cranks it up. Jen, I like the way you break down the artwork and style. It's very busy and highly colored, with lots to keep your eye hoping. She actually meant hopping. I remember seeing Shane. He's a good supporter of Substack. My Substack, anyway. I remember seeing this amongst the Image comics at the local shop and passing on it. But I love your analysis of it, especially in the context of what was happening with Image at the time. Michael Alford. I own the complete Trencher. I had no idea Keith Giffen passed you. So that's it. Do you think this book is genius, or do you think it's ugly? I'd like to hear your opinion in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.